Mastering the Game, Inside Coaching Minds. In this first of 2 episodes, we're going to sit down with legendary Hall of Fame football coach Larry Kehres as he looks into the integration of behavioral science principles into coaching practices. Coach Fuline is also going to join us, and both will share invaluable insights drawing from their extensive experience and success in college athletics. Welcome, Coach. And Coach, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Great. So, Coach Kehres, can you tell us about a time where you have used behavioral science principles to help your athletes improve?
I think back to when I got my first full-time position as a football coach. I had been a grad assistant at Bowling Green and got to see a Division I staff work together in sort of an ideal environment in terms of what I'd seen at that point in my life. But I found myself as a 23-year-old head coach at a small high school, fresh off a great graduate course with an outstanding professor at Ohio State, whose name was Darrell Siedentop. And he'd written a book entitled The Development and Control of Behavior in Sport and Physical Education. So I had some ideas on how to make my coaching effective, but I hadn't tried them yet. And I find myself taking over a team that had been 0-10 the season before. And interestingly, this past fall, I went down to have a 50-year reunion with those young men. And arguably, the best player on the team was a very quiet offensive and defensive lineman as a student, senior student in high school. And he walked over when I was standing by myself, and he said to me, "Coach Kehres, we had never had a positive coach like you when you came here." And I thought, that's what I was trying to be. I felt it would make my coaching more effective. I tried to get my 2 assistants to follow some of the principles I had learned in grad school. And we made an impression on this young guy so much that that's what he remembers 50 years later. So yes, I think I did use that principle of delivering positive reinforcement as specifically as possible in regard to skill attempts and other behaviors as I could. But another behavioral principle that I had learned in Dr. Siedentop's class was that at times there are behaviors that have to be extinguished.
Gotcha.
That's very difficult. Sure, it's more difficult to do that than to deliver positive reinforcement and shape desirable skills. But in the summer, approaching that first season with these young men, the young guy that had been the quarterback the previous year, the young guy described as the best athlete in our school, was not attending our workout sessions. I called, visited his home, encouraged him to come, but he had other things to do. He had reasons why he couldn't come. Some of the other guys, he doesn't like the stuff we do in football prior to the start of practice. Now, the team had been 0-10 the previous year. So I thought there might be some behavior that I'm going to have to shape in this process. So the young man did come. The night equipment was being handed out, but by that time, another student was the quarterback. He had worked with his teammates through most of the summer, leading up to 2-a-day practices. So I told this young man, let's call him Joe. I'm glad you want to be on the team, but he told me, I'm your quarterback. I said, well, you're not going to be the quarterback.
Okay.
That was a tough step, but this lack of attendance, I'm not interested in the things that the team does until the real practice starts, just wasn't an acceptable behavior. So he tossed his equipment on the ground, decided I'm not playing. I thought, well, I've taken the step that I need to take to extinguish the notion that you can miss practice and miss the things that a team does together. And this young guy has decided not to play football. He's going to concentrate on his favorite sport, basketball. But I had demonstrated to the young men that attendance was important, that your attendance is appreciated. It counts in terms of the evaluation we're going to make on your ability to be a first team player. And I think had I stayed there as a coach over the years, the message was delivered. When the football team gets together to do workouts, if you're on the team, your attendance is appreciated. And there are certainly legitimate reasons you can't be here, but you better have one of those reasons. So right off, initially, as I'm getting started trying to be a coach, I have to use some of the principles that I've learned. But I found that these principles, they do develop behaviors. They work in the development of the skills in the sports that we teach. We could teach skills step by step and reinforce each step along the way until we have the skill at the point that we feel is needed for an individual to be successful at his position. So I was tested as I began my coaching career as a 23-year-old,
Right.
in terms of, do you believe in these things or not? A little bit later that year, Labor Day was the first Monday before the Friday game, and I told the guys, well, we'll have practice early in the day, Monday. There'll be no school. And I was told, well, that's an all-day picnic and games activity day at Sportsman's Park. I said, well, let's go to Sportsman's Park after we practice. Is that okay? And 100% of the guys were at practice. So behavioral principles work. They really do work. I've believed that since my first year as a high school coach. The idea that I was a positive coach was delivered to me by a positive comment by a young man, 50 years after that high school season. That's what he remembered.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like you stuck to your principles and that you knew what you wanted to do as a coach when you went in, but there were challenges, of course, right? So what do you do with that one athlete? What happened to Joe? I'm curious. What happened?
Joe played basketball quite well.
Okay.
And I don't think he missed football.
Mm-hmm.
But, a team has to have, as their leaders, players, student athletes that are, what we might say all in.
Right.
They're trying to be the best player that they can be with the help of their coach.
Right.
And that's where leadership within a team comes from. We don't always have those athletes at every spot on a team. Not every coach is privileged to have a talented player at every critical position, but that's what we're striving for.
Right.
And I planned on being at that school for a number of years. As it turns out, I left and came to Mount Union,
Right.
After that 1 year. But working with those young, I'll give you another example. There were only 3 coaches. I mentioned I'd been a grad assistant at Bowling Green, and I saw there that every position group of players had a coach.
Mm-hmm.
They could work on their individual skill development with a very talented coach. There were just 3 of us with this high school team, and so I had to work in groups. One of the 3 was a young man who was a first-year teacher who had been a college basketball player, hadn't played football. So I didn't have an ideal situation in which to develop skills individually. I had to do it more as a group. And so I had to instruct the other 2 coaches, in terms of little steps that a group could take that would indicate that they were moving in the right direction and learning. And we had reinforced those little bitty improvements. Remember, these guys hadn't won any games the previous year. So we worked toward the development of skills in a methodical manner. And I learned that that's how you work individually.
Right.
It's a methodical process where I always coach quarterbacks at Mount Union, where a quarterback develops the 5 key skills that I think define his position with the help of me, with working with other quarterbacks every day in practice. We improve the skills that will make our quarterbacks effective leaders. And it will take our offense to outstanding performances in games.
Right. So it's interesting that you say that you're working to develop the skills that you know and you feel are going to make that player the best that they can be. What do you do beyond just getting started, how do you keep that up through a whole season? Because you got a lot of things going on through a season. You're dealing with players with personal issues, you're dealing with team dynamics. What are you doing to make sure that those behaviors don't just get started, but they maintain through that whole season?
Well, the book written by Dr. Seentop was entitled The Development and Control of Behavior. So he had theories on how to develop skills. And that's what coaches do when we work individually with players. When I work with quarterbacks and just quarterbacks, we're working on passing accuracy. We're working on our agility, meaning that we can move off our spot and still make an accurate pass. We work on decision making. I might be the defensive player myself, and if I move toward the flat, the quarterback throws the curl. If I move toward the curl, he throws the flat. But individually, we develop the skills. Now, how do we maintain those skills?
Right.
We develop those skills in just a quarterback environment. Then we perfect those skills, improve those skills with real defensive players from our own team. But ultimately, we're leading toward perfecting those skills against an excellent team,
right,
or a group of excellent teams. So I increased the difficulty at practice. I'll give you an example. I had a very experienced quarterback. He was in his fourth year of starting and won a lot of awards. So I put 13 players on defense. 6 rushed.
right,
5 played man-to-man pass defense on the 5 possible receivers, and 2 played deep zone coverage. Now they were young players, but for him to have an open receiver was much more difficult than if there were only 11 defensive players.
right,
6 rushers, which might chase him off his spot more often. Man-to-man coverage, which meant that his first team receivers had to work harder to get open. And if they did go deep to get open against a slower player, there were 2 zone defenders waiting on them. So I raised the ante in terms of what it took in terms of intelligence, knowledge, effort to be successful in practice, because that's what a tough opponent would do in a game. So we control all the variables, and by changing the variables, I was able, I think, to help maintain a sharpness and an intensity in an experienced player who maybe wasn't challenged by a normal type of practice. And I couldn't do that throughout the entire practice, but I found ways to make it more difficult for him to perform at the level that he expected of himself.
Based on what Coach is saying here, Coach Fuline, have you been able to see some integration of his principles into your practices or the way you prepare players? And what level of success have you found in a totally different sport? He's talking football, and we know you're basketball.
Well, I can remember it was probably like my second month on the job here. And I think I went to Coach's office, which I did pretty much every day, to kind of drink coffee, but more so I'm learning every day through him. And I think he sensed that real early. It was kind of like a sponge. And I remember me making a comment to the effect of, so-and-so, I just can't get through them. They're not doing this well. It may have been rebounding basketball. And he just kind of nods, and anyone who knows him knows the nod and the stare a little bit. And I said, what? He goes, well, prove it to me. So what are you talking about? Well, prove it to me. I need some video evidence of, and right then, I got like real warm, like, oh, no, But what I learned at that moment was, kind of the discipline to, before you have these interactions with players, before you have, you're teaching those disciplines, then you better have it yourself. You better be able to have accountability into some of the things that you're demanding. He and I talked earlier today, and he's always challenged me in such a positive way. And the one thing that I need to be better at is, some of the things that he's talking about. The consistency that you brought up. I may have, firm thoughts on how this team has to look this year. Here's a behavior that we have to be better at. My consistency at that throughout the year is poor at times, you know. So even as these young coaches are watching this, I mean, that is a developed kind of skill that we have to. Someone like me is, you have to be able to identify some of your weaknesses as much as your strengths, and is to be able to have that inside your program, and then live with some of those consequences. I think, when Coach Kehres talks about some of these things, we think about him as the Hall of Famer, and well, it's easy for you. Well, it wasn't always that easy for you. I mean, there's got to be a line in the sand.
Well, that's it for part 1 of Mastering the Game Inside Coaching Minds. We hope you found the insights shared by Coach Kehres and Coach Fuline both valuable and insightful. Stay tuned for part 2. We're going to continue to explore the integration of behavioral science principles into coaching practices and uncover strategies for optimizing athlete performance. You won't want to miss out on more invaluable insights from Coach Kehres and Coach Fuline, so keep listening, stay engaged as we continue our journey of mastering the game.